Chapter 6. Jack's eyes widened and his belly tightened in knots as he watched the beautiful woman in the long white wedding gown glide down the staircase. Bella had only just agreed to marry him a week ago, and today she was becoming his wife. Only 2 days ago her dad moved into Jack's house. Everything in his life had changed so quickly. Bella walked down the staircase in her mother's lacy wedding gown, looking more beautiful than any woman he'd ever seen. Jack swallowed a lump of emotion that had somehow clogged his throat. Bella was too beautiful to be marrying him, a man whom folks around town called the Beast. But he needed to do this. It was only for a year. After that, both of them would be free of this marriage in name only. Jack convinced himself that he'd be happy to be free of the marriage shackles when the time came. Yet, if he really believed that, why did his heartbeat accelerate like a runaway race car? Jack stood motionless, his eyes riveted on his future wife. Bella reached the bottom of the staircase and rested her hand on her dad's arm. Her dad looked up from his sitting position in his wheelchair, smiling up at her. She wore a tender smile on her beautiful face as she bent down and kissed his cheek. Bella Campbell's nurse, Marmee, guided his wheelchair to the front of the room as Bella walked alongside, with her hand on her dad's shoulder. Jack stared at his bride, mesmerized by every part of her features. Her graceful walk, her womanly figure, and her thick brown hair that fell in silky waves to her waist. His knees weakened, and he stood frozen, staring into her upturned face with those expressive dark brown doe eyes. Finally, his bride stood in front of him. Large eyes filled with uncertainty stared back at him. His bride-to-be's father moved closer to Jack. "I'll be needing you to take good care of my daughter, Jack." Bella Campbell sat in his wheelchair, his wide green eyes studying him. Jack saw real concern there. He knew what Bella's dad was really saying. If something went south with his health and he was no longer around for his daughter, would Jack make sure she didn't have to worry? The answer, of course, was yes. He reached down and gripped Dunlan's hand in a firm handshake. "I promise." Dunlan's wide smile revealed his pleasure. He placed his daughter's hand on top of Jack's. Bella reached down to kiss her dad's cheek once more before she looked back up at Jack. Her body teetered slightly, and she placed a hand on her dad's wheelchair for support. Jack tucked one hand around her slender waist and pulled her to his side. Her cheeks blossomed into a flurry of pink. As they spoke their vows, Bella's cheeks remained a delightful rose color. All too soon the wedding ceremony came to a close. "You may kiss the bride." The pastor's words brought a jolt of awareness to Jack. Bella's gaze remained glued to his, unreadable. He wondered what was going through that intelligent mind of hers. When Jack had first talked about marrying, Bella had stated emphatically that she wanted her dad and his family to believe they were marrying for love. Even though Jack was convinced he would never fall in love again, he was ready to make their families believe they had fallen in love. He'd agreed to do it for Bella. Jack leaned down, slowly taking in every curve of her face. With one hand on her waist, he pulled her close. With the other hand, he tilted up her chin. His heart pounded hard and slow as he leaned closer, focused on the fullness of her lips, until his mouth touched their sweetness. Bella's lips melted deeper into his own until he didn't know where hers began and his ended. Heat curled in his belly, turning into hot molten liquid. All thoughts of anything else faded away, replaced by the increased pounding of his heart in his ears. Desire seeped into his belly like an injection of hot lava. The sweetness of her lips made him feel like he was falling. Bewildered at his response to his new wife, he forced himself to step back. He stared down at Bella, shocked and confused all at the same time. Sudden thoughts swirled in his head, a pathetic, panicky kind of denial of what just happened, and a tingling sensation crept up his spine, touching the back of his neck. Jack's growing awareness of his new bride was beginning to cause more trouble than he'd originally planned. Mixed emotions ran through him like a train wreck, barreling down an unfinished track, without a clue about how he was going to stop the collision. An overwhelming sense of panic flooded him. He forced a smile on his lips, but his insides were churning and unsteady. Bella's knees turned weak from Jack's passionate kiss, but just as quickly her new husband stepped away. With trembling fingers she touched her lips, and a tingling warmth cascaded through them. For a moment she didn't move, couldn't breathe, as she peered up at the stoic countenance of her new husband. The only sign that he felt anything was a slight tick in his set jawline. Jack's hooded gaze peered down at her for a moment longer before offering her his arm. The room that had been quiet until now suddenly burst forth into a hubbub of sound. The background music grew louder. The wedding guests clapped. At that moment, the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. "Ladies and gentlemen, introducing Jack and Bella Stevenson." A rush of heat spread up her neck to her cheeks as she saw Jack's family, her dad, and their friends glancing between her and Jack. Jack stepped closer to her side, his hand tucking hers more firmly into the curve of his arm as they walked down the aisle toward the back of the room. Bella pasted on a smile and peered up at Jack. Her new husband gave her a barely there smile. The look in his eyes resembled a sort of deer-in-the-headlights look of surprise. She was relieved when family and other wedding guests interrupted them. "Oh, Bella, I'm so happy for you. Now we're truly sisters." Her best friend Al wrapped her arms around her and kissed her cheek and whispered, "Jack keeps looking at you like a man who doesn't know what just hit him. I think he's falling for you, Bella." Al stepped back and rubbed her baby bump, a playful smile hovering on her lips. Rolling her eyes, Bella let her friend know she didn't believe a word of it. Jack had only proposed because he wanted his inheritance, and she had agreed because that was the only way she could finish her dad's contract. They'd agreed to a fake marriage, and as far as she could tell, Jack didn't harbor any romantic feelings for her. Bella gave Al a weak smile as she was reminded of the uncertain future that loomed large on the horizon. "We'll talk later, Al. You know I adore you for being such a good friend." "Love you too, sis." Al leaned over and kissed her cheek before she moved on. Soon Bella was hugged and kissed by Jack's brothers, Adam, Gabe, Luke, and Zach. Gabe gave her a big hug, his words a half whisper. "Don't let Jack run you over. Let him know how you feel. He needs someone in his life to help keep him in check." Heat flushed Bella's cheeks. "I'll do my best, Gabe." "Gabe, what sort of lies are you mumbling into my wife's ear?" Jack placed a large hand around Bella's waist, pulling her close to his side and kissing the top of her head. Warm tingles skittered from her waist, where Jack's hand rested all the way up to her neck. Even as insecurities plagued her about marrying Jack, her body betrayed her at the pleasure of his touch. "Oh, my dear, it's wonderful to have another daughter in the family." Eliza Stevenson embraced her in a gentle hug. "I'm not surprised Jack snatched you up and married you so quickly. You're beautiful, Bella, and he's in love. Once my son knows what he wants, he chases after it with intense focus." "Thank you for your kind words, Mrs. Stevenson." Bella pulled back, a wobbly smile plastered to her lips. A deep longing stirred inside her at her mother-in-law's words. She realized how much she wished her words were true. But the sad reality was, Eliza's words weren't true. She rubbed clammy hands along the sides of her wedding dress, unsure of what to say. "Please, Bella, call me Mom or Eliza. I'm really looking forward to getting to know you better." Jack's grandmother came to stand beside Eliza with Jack's grandfather beside her. "And I second that. It's wonderful to celebrate this day with you and Jack." Catherine Stevenson put her hands on Bella's shoulders and kissed her cheek. "Thank you, Mrs. Stevenson." "Now, none of that. You're part of this family. Please call me Grandma, my dear." She turned her head to look at her husband. "And call my husband Granddad, just like Jack does. You're part of our family now." Tears smarted in her eyes at how easily they welcomed her into their family. I will. Thanks, Grandma. Bella was suddenly overcome by guilt at the welcome she received from Jack's mom and grandparents. They saw her as a woman that Jack married for love, when in her mind nothing could be further from the truth. Jack saw marrying her as a way to get his hands on his inheritance, but she couldn't fault him for it because they both benefited from this fake marriage. It was Jack's offer to let her take over her dad's contract that would allow her to pay off their debt and pay for a nurse for her dad that made her think that this marriage contract was a good idea. Still, with their parents and grandparents convinced this marriage was a love match, it was more important than ever for her and Jack to make them believe they loved each other. Memories of Jack's kiss made her want to believe in a forever kind of love. When Jack pulled her close to his side and leaned over and kissed her cheek, she had to remind herself that this relationship wasn't real. Her new husband was just acting the part of a man in love.
Ah, young love, those were the good old days, right, sweetheart?
Jack's granddad smiled mischievously at his wife and turned to wink at Bella. Those days were good, but now we have a love that is stronger, William. And you two will also have a strong love too, as you continue to show your love daily to each other. Catherine pulled Jack into an embrace and kissed his cheek.
That's the fun part.
William winked at Bella and Jack. Bella caught the flush of pink that rose up on Jack's grandmom's cheeks and grinned. Seeing their loving banter with one another was something Bella realized she had missed in her childhood. Her mother died when she was born and all but one of her grandparents had passed away. She never had the chance to see an example of love and commitment from her parents or grandparents as a child. An unfamiliar longing rose up inside her. It was the kind of ache that could only be satisfied by being part of a family that loved her. She watched her dad as his nurse pushed his wheelchair behind her. With her dad and Aunt Maisie showering so much love on her, she had a lot to be thankful for. Leaning over, Bella gave her dad a big hug. Dad, I just want to let you know how much I love you and how grateful I am for you.
Aye, my beauty, I love you too, lassie.
A sheen of tears moistened Bella Campbell's eyes. He was a big, strong man who didn't share his emotions freely. When he did, there was a depth of meaning behind it.
You're so beautiful standing there in your mother's wedding dress, lassie. Seeing you wearing it today brought to mind so many wonderful memories of when I married Isabella Rose. Not only do you have your mother's name, but also her beautiful face and form. She would have loved to see you wearing her dress and marrying Jack today.
Oh, Dad, I wish she could have been here today, too. But I'm thankful we carry the wonderful memories of Mom in our hearts. With gentle fingers, our father wiped a tear that ran down her cheek.
You've the right of it, lassie. I think she's looking down from heaven today with a big smile on her face.
And I think so, too. You're beautiful, Bella. Aunt Maisie walked up behind her dad and wrapped Bella in her arms. Thank you, Aunt Maisie. Bella sighed. I'm glad you're here. Well, where else would I be when my only niece is getting married? Aunt Maisie ran her hands gently down the lace sleeves of her mother's wedding dress, a wistful smile on her face. Her brows puckered in concern as she looked deep into Bella's eyes and leaned close to whisper, I just want you to know you can talk to me about anything, all right? I know, and I appreciate that. Thanks, Aunt Maisie. Bella forced a smile. She understood the hidden meaning behind her aunt's words. Her aunt wondered why she'd married Jack without so much as giving her a hint that anything was going on between them. An uncomfortable wave of warmth brushed her neck and face. It seemed she was struck between a rock and a hard place. Her aunt wanted to know the whole truth, but she couldn't tell her because of loyalty to Jack. Relief washed over Bella as her aunt turned to talk to Jack. Soon more friends came to wish them well. Rory gave her a big hug. This wedding was quite a surprise, Bella, but I couldn't be happier for you. Her friend stepped closer and whispered, And just to give you a heads up, There's one mutual friend that is very unhappy to hear of your wedding." Mason. Bella cringed a little on the inside. Her old high school boyfriend was a nuisance that continued to plague her. "Mason already knows I'm not interested in him. I spoke to him only a week ago." "I know, Bella, but I'd still be on the lookout for him. Remember what you told me happened in high school?" Rory pointed out an incident that Bella wished she could erase from her memory. They had been in their senior year, and Bella had just broke up with Mason. She wasn't sure what happened, only that her ex-boyfriend seemed to come unhinged from their breakup. He became really mean to her and told embarrassing stories about Bella's father that weren't true. It wasn't long before she heard rumors spreading from every direction that her dad was a mad scientist. Before long, her friends started asking if everything was okay with her dad. She didn't want to have to deal with him again. "I remember," Bella sighed. "I just hope Mason doesn't create new problems for you, Bella." "Well, I'm not going to worry about Mason. I've got enough things going on in my life to handle right now, without adding anything more." Bella clenched her hands in front of her. "But thanks for letting me know, Rory." "Of course. And in case I didn't tell you, you look great today, Bella. I'm so happy for you." Rory kissed her cheek and moved away to talk to other people. Bella breathed a sigh of relief when she'd finished talking with most of the guests that came to the wedding. Knots of anxiety formed in her stomach from everything that was going on in her life. Finishing her dad's contract with Jack was Bella's biggest concern right now. Her new husband was a handsome man despite his scar, but his gruff and overbearing personality overwhelmed her. She would need to learn to stand up to Jack. Her hands trembled at her side and she gripped the lacy material of her mother's wedding gown. How was she supposed to keep up this pretend marriage for an entire year? Jack sighed in relief as soon as he finished talking with the small group of family and friends that had shown up to their wedding. Bella had wanted a simple and private ceremony, and having the wedding at his home in the mountains seemed ideal for that. He was now married to Bella Campbell, Bella Stevenson. Jack glanced over at the beautiful woman who was now his wife. Brown hair hung in waves over her shoulders and down her back. Beautiful silky waves. He lifted his hand and twirled a handful through his fingers. Bella turned to peer up at him. Doubt and uncertainty plagued her big brown eyes. Her hands continued to fidget with her wedding dress. It suddenly struck Jack that perhaps this day had been a bit much for her. "Come with me, Bella. I want to show you a perfect place to relax." Jack gripped Bella's cold hand, and they walked down the hallway and through open French doors. The room was a conservatory that opened to a large balcony. The sweet smell of roses filled the room. He tugged on Bella's hand and walked with her until they stood in the middle of the greenery. Jack knew bringing his new wife here was the right choice when her eyes widened and a slow smile formed on her lips. Bella stood motionless for a moment, inhaling the scent of the tall green vines and perennial plants that surrounded every corner of the room. "This is so beautiful, Jack. So many wonderful scents fill this room. I smell lemon, chocolate, rose, and herbal-type scents." Bella stepped closer to the plants that were woven through the wooden lattice. "This is a scented geranium, and this plant over here has that chocolate fragrance." Jack pointed to a leaf shaped like lace. "Next to it are citrus blossoms, which is that lemon scent you smelled earlier. And over here, this shrub-like tree is a sweet bay, which gives off a savory herbal scent." Bella walked up to each of the plants, running her fingers along their velvet tips. Her eyes closed, breathing in their aroma, a small smile on her lips. Jack watched her with his hands in his pockets. "Just take a moment and breathe in the beauty of the flowers and relax from the stress of the day." "How did you know this is what I needed?" Bella turned and looked up at him, her gaze thoughtful and full of questions. "You get a line between your eyebrows when you're worried about something. You had that same line when you stepped out of the hospital from seeing your dad, and you have it now." Jack reached over and traced a finger gently down the lines in her forehead, trying to erase the grooves. Bella shivered at his gentle touch. She closed her eyes and sighed. "I feel better already, Jack."
"Good, I'm glad."
Jack stood there a moment looking at her beautiful face, loving the feel of her soft skin unmarred by flaws or scars. He wanted to lean down and kiss the end of her nose, her pink cheeks and rosy red lips, but stopped himself as soon as that thought entered his mind. Jack jerked his hand away, not liking the direction of his wayward thoughts. He walked over to the middle of the room, where there were many different varieties of rose bushes. He picked up a deep pink-colored rose, and with the small plant scissors he kept in the conservatory, snipped off a rose that had the fullest blossoms.
"This is one of the most exquisite rose bushes in the conservatory. My mother, who loves to grow roses, started this deep pink-purple strain."
Jack breathed deeply of its scent, a slight smile on his face. He handed the rose to his bride, his gaze focused on her delicate features.
"For you, my bride. Its beauty doesn't do you justice."
A surprised wonder lit up Bella's face, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. His wife held the rose between her fingers and touched her nose to the tip of the rose, breathing in the sweet aroma. "This is heaven on earth. Thank you, Jack. You just made this day perfect." Jack sucked in a breath, uncomfortable with the mixture of emotions that washed over him. Suddenly he was aware that he was happy to have pleased his new wife. It wasn't like him to want to please anyone. His own emotions and actions confused him. He had the reputation of a gruff and demanding man who lived as a hermit in the mountains. The fact was, he was used to people walking the other way when they saw him coming, or just avoiding him altogether. But Bella's smile and her look of pure joy and happiness caused him to come undone. He didn't know what was happening to him. Jack only knew he wanted more of it. Yet he was much too afraid of the power of these raw emotions to get too close. How would he be able to guard his heart from his wife when, from now on, she would be by his side every day?